Good day, beautiful people. It is my delight to bring the accomplishments of the ancestors to you. Today, I am bringing to you Mr. Robert Smalls. He was born in 1839 and passed away in 1915. He was an American politician who was born into slavery in Beaufort, South Carolina. During the American Civil War, the still enslaved Smalls commandeered a Confederate transport ship in Charleston Harbor and sailed it from the Confederate-controlled waters of the harbor to the U.S. blockade that surrounded it. He then piloted the ship to the Union-controlled enclave in Beaufort Port Royal Hilton Head Island area, where it became a Union warship. In the process, he freed himself, his crew, and their families. His example and persuasion helped convince President Abraham Lincoln to accept African American soldiers into the Union Army. After the Civil War, Smalls returned to Beaufort and became a politician, winning election as a Republican to the South Carolina legislature and the United States House of Representatives during the Reconstruction era. He authored state legislation providing for South Carolina to have the first free and compulsory public school system in the United States. He was a founder of the Republican Party of South Carolina and the last member of that party to represent South Carolina's 5th Congressional District. Mr. Robert Smalls was born again in 1939 to Lydia Polite, a woman enslaved by Henry McKee. She gave birth to him in a cabin in Prince Street in Beaufort, South Carolina. He grew up in the city under the influence of the low country Gullah culture of his mother. His mother served as a servant in the house. At the age of 12, Smalls went to live in Charleston. Smalls worked as a longshoreman, rigger, and sailmaker, and eventually worked his way up to become a wheelman, more or less a helmsman, though enslaved people were not permitted that title. As a result, he was very knowledgeable about Charleston Harbor, and this in fact played a great role in the actual act of defiance that he enacted. He married at the age of 17. Him and his wife had 2 children together, one of whom died at the age of 2 years old. Smalls aimed to pay for his wife and their children's freedom by purchasing them outright, but the cost was $800, the equivalent of $27,000 in today's money. In 1861, the Battle of Fort Sumter of the Civil War began, and Smalls was assigned to steer the CSS Planter. Throughout this time, Smalls appeared content, and he gained the confidence of the Planter's crew and the owners. But sometime in 1862, he began to plan an escape. He discussed the matter with the other enslaved people on the crew, except one whom he did not trust. During this uprising, Smalls put on the captain's uniform and wore a straw hat similar to the captain's. He sailed the Planter past what was then called Southern Wharf and stopped at another wharf to pick up his wife and children and the families of other crewmen. The alarm was only raised after the ship was beyond gun range, for rather than turn east towards Morris Island, Smalls headed straight for the Union Navy fleet, replacing the rebel flags with white bed sheets that had been bought by his wife. The Planter had been seen by the USS Onward, which was about to fire until a crewman spotted the white flag. In the dark, the sheet was difficult to see, but the sunrise arrived, which allowed viewing. Smalls had just turned 23 years old, and he quickly became known in the North as a hero for his daring exploit. Newspapers and magazines reported his actions, and the U.S. Congress passed a bill awarding Smalls and his crewmen the prize money for the Planter. Southern newspapers demanded harsh discipline for the Confederate officers whose joint shore leave had allowed Smalls and his men to steal the boat. Smalls' share of the money was $1,500, equivalent to $45,000 today. Immediately after capture, Smalls was invited to travel to New York to help raise money for formerly enslaved people. Immediately following the war, Smalls returned to his native Beaufort, where he purchased his former master's house at 511 Prince Street, which Union tax authorities had seized in 1863 for refusal to pay taxes. Later, the former owner sued to regain the property, but Smalls retained ownership in the court case. The case became an important precedent in other similar cases. His mother, Lydia, lived with him for the remainder of her life. He allowed his former enslaver's wife, the elderly Jane McKee, to move into her former home prior to her death. Smalls spent 9 months learning to read and write. He purchased a 2-story Beaumont building to use as a school for African American children. He also had several business ventures. He opened a store to serve freedmen. Smalls invested significantly in the economic development of the Charleston-Beaufort region. In 1870, in anticipation of a Reconstruction-based prosperity, Smalls, with fellow representatives, formed the Enterprise Railroad, an 18-mile horse-drawn railway line that carried cargo and passengers between Charleston wharves and depots. Smalls was affiliated with the Republican Party, the party that dominated the northern states and passed laws granting protections for African Americans in the aftermath of the Civil War. This man has many, many great accolades, and for him to have achieved and accomplished the things that he did in the time frame that he lived is absolutely amazing. And when I hear stories like this, I just absolutely have to bring it to the forefront, because a lot of the history and the stories of some of these ancestors, they go unturned, unheard about. And these are the type of people and situations that we need to hear about. We need to hear about people like this and Queen Nanny and lots of other ancestors that did great things. For this man to have been a slave, to learn how to conduct and captain a ship, then to take over a Confederate ship, gain the freedom of his wife and the lives of his crew members' families, to then turn around and buy his slave master's house and allow his former slave master's wife to live in the house until she passed away, which showed that he had a tremendously great and compassionate heart. And then to turn around and teach himself to read, to open a school for freed people, to open a store for freed people, and to run for Congress. That's an amazing life. And salute to Mr. Robert Smalls. I'm almost at a loss for words for him to have, again, achieved what he did during that time. It just makes me even more confident and prideful of the stock that some of us come from, and to know that we can do anything if we just put our minds to it. If you didn't already know about Mr. Robert Smalls, I want to thank you all for listening and watching. If you did, please add anything that I missed. And I want you all just to know that this is the strongest of the strong. For a lot of us to have survived what we have survived, that means that someone before us had to survive. Now, some may say that they had it worse back then than we do now, and some may say the opposite, but they did not have a lot of the conveniences. They didn't even have their freedom. This is a testament that anything is possible. I want to thank you all for watching, and you be blessed.